most of these academics don't know anything. They don't know anything more than you do. Academic professors at universities are promoting horrible ideas and ways of thinking that will ruin your success in dating and relationships and ruin the way that you see the world and often ruin your success in other areas of your life. There was a time when you could look at somebody with a doctor at the end of the name, PsyD, psychologist, professor of neurology or anthropology or psychiatry or psychology, that we could look at these people as authority. There's still an assumption when you hear information, and whether it's a talk on YouTube or a book that's being promoted, there's an assumption of authority and competency when somebody has an academic background. When someone works in academia, you assume that their information is going to be well researched, that they're going to know more than you, and that they're going to tell you things that are ideas that are going to be able to help you. That assumption is especially true when we're talking about relationship psychology and anything involving sexual dynamics. The reality is, though, most of these academics don't know anything. They don't know anything more than you do. These academics have a lot of bad ideas and a lot of biases, and they bring these biases into their research. They bring these biases into their writings. And these biases are emotional in thinking. They're not real. They're also socially conditioned by the social circles that they're in. So if you have a university professor out in California, for example, that person is going to be very influenced by their social circles. And I'm not saying every single academic is terrible, but it's very, very difficult for a professor of whatever, right, to not be influenced by things like feminism, things like leftist politics, which is rampant in the universities. And these things are mind viruses, okay? Like, you can look at Godsod's books on the parasitic mind. All right. These are mind viruses that infect even the smartest people in the way that they think. And that filters into the cultural narrative, into TED Talks, into YouTube videos, into articles. And people will read articles and see things and believe them to be true just because something was published in a respectable journal or somebody had a doctor at the end of their name. But most of these people don't know anything. And it's not that they just don't know anything, it's that their biases are so strong that their ideas are bad and the evidence to support them isn't really there, but they think that it is because they're looking at things through a biased lens, and it just sets you up for failure. And that is why you have to look critically at anything you're reading, anything that you're listening to, being told, all right, including anything I say. You should always look critically at things and recognize that results in your life, getting actual results by taking action, that is your measurement of whether something is a good idea or a bad idea. If people who are better than you at something because they've learned some skills that are getting good results, right? Then reasonably you could learn those skills and get good results too. Okay. Those ideas then would be, by evidence of good results, good ideas. But if a bunch of people are living their lives the way that you don't want and getting results that you don't want, their ideas on what to do or the ideas about the world are probably wrong. And that would be the case with most of these academics. Now, I'm going to prove it by going through an article today. Article is titled, "Here is What the Manosphere Gets Wrong About Cuckoldry." All right. So it's written by university professor Brooke, I cannot pronounce the last name, Schelza, out in California, of course. So now you'll see that Brooke is going to have a bias in her opinions, and we'll get over through that. And let's look at this and ask ourselves where those biases are. This is printed in Scientific America, which is a very respectable journal. Even though it's an opinion piece, it's still a respectable source for people. So when people read this, they're going to sense that there's an authority here and that she knows what she's talking about. But the reality is is that remains to be seen, right? So let's read through it. She writes, in online forums, the term cuck has become synonymous with sucker or loser, but this distorts its history and meaning, creating a baseless moral panic that harms both women and science. Okay. So her claim is that the social narrative about cucking and the term cuck and cuckoldry is that the narrative is somehow bad for women and bad for science. Okay. Well, what about men? Is it bad for men? You see? So you got to be able to see between the lines when people write stuff. Okay? So, and I've said before in my cucking videos that you can look through in cuck psychology is yes, cucking is generally a bad deal for men. Open polyamory, where a girl sleeps with other guys in a relationship, is going to be a bad deal for you if you're in that relationship. I've proven that in other videos. I've gone through the arguments. The evidence is there. And so it's a bad deal for men, but maybe this idea I'm presenting is bad for women somehow and bad for science, according to Dr. Brooke. I cannot pronounce. I don't know how you say her last name. So anyway, she writes, in the manosphere, an online world of angry men, those who have been red pilled, she puts them all in quotes, in a nod to the film The Matrix, have purportedly been awakened to the truth about gender and sexual politics. At its core, the notion that men do not actually have systemic privilege. They are instead at the whims of women who will take advantage of them unless they assert their dominance. In their worldview, the cuck is a disenfranchised victim of hyper-feminist power. All right, there's a lot of words in that sentence there. What's she really saying? Well, she's illustrating that she sees things in terms of privileged and not privileged. When people use terms like systemic privilege, what they're illustrating is a have and have not mindset, a victim and a perpetrator mindset. This binary illogical fallacy is what leads to things like socialism and communism. All right. It's what leads to woke politics. It's what leads to identity politics. It's what leads to these ideas that there's an oppressor in the oppressed, and whoever is perceived as being in power must be the oppressor. All right. And that we need to take power from the oppressor and give it to the oppressed. It's a worldview that's very, very toxic and very poisonous because it's not objectively true. Right. Sometimes people are victims. Sometimes people are oppressors. Sometimes people are both. Sometimes there's people in power are not taking advantage of anyone. Sometimes they are. It's not objectively this binary thing. There's a lot of things in the middle. And at least politically speaking, my opinion is we need to work towards giving people freedoms and choices to decide how they want to do their lives, not assuming that people are oppressed or oppressors and trying to take from others to give to others. You know what I mean? But that's her worldview. So already she's coming at it in a way that many people who've sought help on the internet, men have sought help on the internet through Red Pill Space or Manosphere, right? Those men were seeking help because they had been victimized by a system, because there's not a clear oppressed and oppressor. I'm not saying women are the oppressors either. See, she assumes that a red pill person thinks women are oppressing men and society is going to oppress men. Now, there are some that think that way, but I would say that a large majority of men who turn to this content don't think that way. That's not how they think. There's just scenarios and situations where men can be screwed over by the system. That is objectively true. There's scenarios where men can be screwed over by the women that they're in love with. And maybe they need to think through their relationships handling skills and think through their decision making a little bit differently, right? That's not necessarily saying that there's an oppressed or oppressor or somebody has systemic privilege. Things like systemic privilege, that's not real. Okay, those are illusionary words that people in academia use to try to describe this victim and this victim perpetrator mindset. It's not a real thing that sounds very compelling to some people. So continuing with the article, for evolutionary biologists, the term cuckoldry originated to describe cuckoo birds who lay their eggs in other species' nests, leaving their offspring to be unknowingly raised by foster parents. In humans, it's more broadly used to describe the husbands of unfaithful wives. Such husbands have been said to have been cuckolded. More recently, however, both the manosphere and the alt-right have adopted the term cuck as a more general synonym for weakness, desperation, and foolishness. Yeah, so it's true. The word cuck is definitely a synonym for a weak, foolish male, right? That's definitely taken its turn. But it's also, you know, cucking others is a psychological framework. And I talk about that in my other videos. I want you to notice, though, how she lumps manosphere guys, many of which are just trying to learn about relationships a little bit better so that they don't get hurt in future relationships. That gets conflated and lumped into the same category as alt-right. All right. The government and different organizations have done this to call red pill or manosphere guys in the same category as terrorists. You know what I mean? In the same category as incel shooters. These are not the same categories. All right. But this is a straw man that gets created to lump any man who is seeking out information that is not really in agreement with feminist ideology, that means that guy is aligned with alt-right or aligned with like incel extremist thinking. That is not true. Just because somebody isn't really inclined to think like this author thinks, right? And to think like feminist academia thinks, that doesn't mean that a man is an extremist. You see, so you got to pay attention to the language and how someone's ideology shows itself in an article. All right. She continues, a resurgence of such wording, previously popular in Renaissance and Shakespearean literature, has been fostered by research within evolutionary psychology, which has been proven to be a treasure trove of inspiration for the most insidious interpretations of women's behavior. See, if you criticize female behavior at all, then you're a incel bad person. You see, that's what's being said here. If you criticize what is being socially conditioned in women that ends up being harmful to them or harmful to their relationships, that criticism is seen as extremist to somebody with a feminist worldview who's writing an article for Scientific America. All right. So I want you to see that problem for what it is. All right. So I'll continue. Evolutionary psychologists have typically emphasized two core functions of cuckoldry: that men are being tricked by women into raising non-biological children, and that care they provide for those children is a wasted effort. Both features have resonated within the manosphere as they depict women as immoral, promiscuous, and untrustworthy, and infer that men are the victims of female cunning. Well, let's look at that. Men are the victim of female behavior all the time, and women are the victims of male behavior all the time. Do you see what I mean? Like, there isn't a clear delineation when we're dealing with gender dynamics. There's not a clear delineation between who is oppressing and who's an oppressor. Oftentimes, right, the hope is in a healthy relationship, in a sexual dynamic, in a relationship, there is no oppressed and oppressor. That's the idea, right? That two people are consensually in a good relationship together. That should be what it is most of the time. All right. But you do have abusive relationships. You do have relationships that go south. And in those situations, men and women are trying to take power in the power dynamic of the relationship. And this is something I talk about a lot because it's a fact of relationships that most people are not talking about, which is that in every relationship that's romantic and sexual dynamic, there's a power dynamic. There's somebody who is the more dominant force, at least in that moment, and somebody who is sort of coming from a position of, weakness, we could call it, or in a position of having less power, we'll say, right? And most often women want to be in the position of having less power so the man can make the decisions. And she wants to be a supporting effort of those decisions. If she feels like she's being taken care of by a strong man who is trustworthy and who looks out after her, that's evolutionarily speaking in our DNA, something that most of us want, right? But in this ideology of, that doesn't recognize power dynamics, because that would mean that there isn't this magical equality thing that people talk about. This is very controversial, and so it's seen as very divisive. The idea that women are sometimes, not all women, not all the time, but sometimes women are promiscuous, and it ruins their ability to have healthy relationships in a long-term monogamous setting. Some women are immoral and screw over guys. The system sometimes supports that, which then makes that seem like it's more prevalent than guys screwing women over. You know what I mean? But there are times guys screw women over too. There's times when men are untrustworthy. There's times when women are untrustworthy. These are realities. But notice how, if you talk about how men are amoral, or men are promiscuous, or men are untrustworthy, or men are victimizing women, that is okay to talk about. It's not okay for an for in academia to say that women do these things too. That's where the problem is. And so you're seen as a crazy person. She is painting this picture of manosphere guys as being crazy extremists who think that women are these immoral, promiscuous, untrustworthy creatures due to cuckoldry. The reality is everyone is an untrustworthy creature to some degree. And also, everyone is capable of being trustworthy, right? So people are human, and people can make mistakes, and people lie. That's a reality, men or women. And some will make the choice to tell the truth more often, and to have more of a moral compass, and to, care about other people a little bit differently. And some will not. And talking about how we all have a nature to do something bad or do something dishonest, men and women. But talking about women and where that nature is, okay, that is seen as extremist behavior according to them. And now you know why most of my stuff is censored on YouTube, because I'm making a sound argument and it's true. If I were just talking in extremist ways and I had some panel going on and girls yelling at me because they didn't like what I said, and then I yell at them back, that would get very popular. YouTube would let that slide through because my credibility isn't there. But when I present these things in a logical format, I'm credible. I know what I'm talking about. And that is scary to people like this, to people who wrote this article, for example. A closer look at science reveals a more complicated picture of cuckoldry, which is likely to promote views and interests of men as it is of women. Okay, let's read on to that. So supposedly, the picture of cuckoldry promotes the views of interests of men and women. Cross-cultural studies of cuckoldry reveals that men are not necessarily being tricked. Oh, really? That they may also advocate for cuckoldry when it suits their interest. So do you see how, okay, I've done videos on how harmful it is for a woman to be sleeping with other men if you're in the context of a long-term relationship. And then people come at me with these stupid ideas about that not being true when all of the evidence shows it's true. Okay, when you bring up one thing that this guy said it was true, or at least he said it was, this guy said, you can just sort of let your women bang other dudes and she'll come back to you and see you as the better guy, like, all right, like, even if that were the case in that guy's relationship, acceptance, the exceptions prove the rule. Exceptions don't make the rule untrue. When the vast majority of people, that is not the scenario. And almost every other time, And I would say every time, because you don't know about those relationships. You're not in them. You don't know what's being said. You don't know what's being lied about. And they don't know what they don't know. In other words, they might not be experiencing what they think they're experiencing. So when you get that one off that says, well, my woman cucks me, bangs other guys, and that's okay, our relationship's successful, that's generally bullshit. All right. Those are one offs that prove that the majority, because it highlights the fact that majority of that doesn't work out. When you have a one-off, that person becomes the one-off or the exception, because most aren't able to do that successfully. You see what I'm saying? Exceptions are exceptions because there's a majority that falls into a certain category. And in this case, almost every single time, and I would argue every time, all right, that does not work where a woman sleeps with other men. Okay. So that is cucking. It doesn't work. But you can see how clever the language is in an academic opinion piece, how it sounds like, this is actually okay for men too. I want you to notice how you are being duped into losing your relationships. So I'll continue. The manosphere depicts cuckolds as hapless suckers duped by cunning women, a picture that fuels misogynistic rhetoric and shields men from accountability for their words and actions. Okay. But anthropologists have shown that paternity and fatherhood are malleable concepts, and both women and men have used to their advantage. Okay, so fatherhood's a malleable concept now. I'm sure gender is as well. All right. You see how, like, all of a sudden, north is south, what's false is true. This is what they do. All right. One of the most popular borrowed theories in online forums is that cuckoldry is the idea that women pursue a dual mating strategy. So this is borrowed from online forums. The reality is that the dual mating strategy is written about extensively in academic literature and recently proved to be the predominant strategy that women have. The dual mating strategy is the predominant strategy that women have, not mate switching or some of the other strategies. And I explained in a previous video why this is controversial. Women hate it because it highlights their inherent deceptiveness in mating. All right. It doesn't make you better as a man because women are deceptive inherently in mating, because you're coercive and violent if you don't have rules yourself as a guy. All right. That's the reality of it. The reality is we're not all this peaceful species. Men will be coercive and violent if, allowed to be. And if they think that way, if they're not evolved in their thinking, their mammalian brain could push them to be that way. And a woman will be deceptive if their mammalian brain will push them to be that way. So we as human beings have to have moral reasoning. We have to have morality. We have to have principles, and we have to listen to those principles and use our logical brain to override our emotions and override our animal parts of our brain. That's what we have to do as human beings, because if not, a man is going to get physically violent or coercive to control his relationships if he doesn't do that. And a woman is going to get deceptive and in some ways coercive, right? And damaging to the man. It's not because women are bad. It's just because that's our strategy if we're leaving it to our animal brains. We don't have morals, principles that we're running on, and we're deferring to instincts. Those instincts don't have morality. That's a proven thing by science. And this is supposedly a professor. Where the fuck, why doesn't she understand that? You know what I mean? Why doesn't she understand that our animal brains are not necessarily moral? Why is it that it's bad to say that about women when it's a true fact? Women's mammalian brains are just amoral with an A, not immoral. Just like a man's mammalian brain, it's not different. That's the animal part of your brain. These are factual things. And these people like to distort facts to promote a cultural ideology, and they present their ideological thinking as true. And if you listen to it and you let it filter into your thinking, it becomes a mind virus. And next thing you know, you're not doing relationships very well, man or woman. So back to dual mating strategy. Seeking long-term partners will be reliable husbands and providers, betas in manosphere lingo, while surreptitiously seeking alphas or extra pair partners with better genes to further their children. The trouble is, there is little evidence women actually engage in a dual mating strategy. That is not true because there is a study that shows recently that is the best study that's been done to date that showed that the dual mating strategy is the female mating strategy, that is what they do. Now, where the evidence gets a little bit shady is on ovulatory shift. All right. So it's not, that's when our data gets a little bit all over the place. And I'm not saying that ovulatory shift doesn't affect behaviors. I think that it does, but it's not as black and white that a woman tries to bang an alpha during ovulation and then, settles with a beta when she's on her period. Like, it's not as black and white with that. So people will use that as saying, well, the dual mating strategy is not true. When reality is that they execute a dual mating strategy all the time, which is to want to sleep with a genetically more genetically fit guy and then settle with somebody less genetically fit for provisioning. It's not that they're trying to do that on purpose. It's just that they can't land the commitment with a more genetically fit guy, but they could land the sex. That's all really what it points to. Do you know what I mean? And it's not to say that every woman is going to execute this strategy because she has a human part of her brain that she can execute morality and beliefs and and you have standards in your relationship. There's a frame you can have. Like, she can do different behaviors. She's not an animal, but there's still a strategy, and has been proven through recent studies. So she is acting like this is just a dumb manosphere idea when academia is producing these studies, and she lies here. This is a lie, saying no studies have shown these preferences are connected. She says, while few studies have shown that women are more interested in extra pair sex when they're ovulating. So she does say few studies show that. Many others do not. Okay, so that's the skewed data. And no studies have shown these preferences are connected to extra pair births. That is not true. We know that there's been a lot of dads even today that are taking care of kids that aren't theirs. We know that. So she says, even within evolutionary psychology, dual mating theory has now been largely dismissed. Look, this article was written in 2024 in September, so like 6 months ago. The research has been out for, since then, that completely defies what she's saying, which is that the dual mating strategy is the primary strategy. So she's really lying here. She's not telling the truth. But dual mating strategy, to these academic feminist types, they just hate it so much. The idea that women are deceptive is something they want to deceive you from believing. You know what I mean? And somehow I'm an extremist maybe by talking about it, which is of course ridiculous. So she writes, anthropology reveals other explanations for cuckoldry that don't necessitate deception. So now we're going to lean towards cuckoldry being a consensual thing, and this is what you should go for, guys. Maybe. Let's see what happens. In some societies, women maintain multiple partners as a way of ensuring they have reliable resources in the face of uncertainty. What comic book is she reading? In many other cases, societal norms and beliefs are constructed by both men and women to support this system. The folk notion of partable paternity held in the indigenous South American cultures regard any man who has sex with a woman around the time of her pregnancy as a claimant to the biological parentage, expected to help provision the woman and her child. She's talking about our promiscuous tribal past and how some tribes in the Amazon still do that. She's neglecting the fact that there's a reason we evolved to conceal things like ovulation and to, there's a reason we evolved in certain ways so that women could conceal, when they're ovulating and conceal who the actual father is. It's because infant mortality rates infanticide is a real thing. There's so many reasons why we've developed as a species for female ovulation to be concealed to the naked eye mostly. All right. And so there's so much data here that shows when a man thinks that he's taking care of somebody else's kid, things like retroactive jealousy kicks in, all kinds of things happen, and that man may kill the kid. That man may kill the woman. That, you see what I mean? Like, there's a cohesive nature with men in this that women had to protect themselves with. She's also neglecting the fact that this is not this egalitarian, this is not this egalitarian society that, well, I don't know what she's thinking, because males are running the tribes by and large. When females ran societies, those societies failed. That's just a reality. We're closer to chimpanzees than we are bonobos still. All right. That might change in 100 years, but that's where we're at. So she's neglecting male leadership and dominance in societies and the social structures. And women were penalized in most cases for cheating or sleeping with multiple guys. They were penalized a lot for that. When we look at those societies, it's usually a smaller number of men that are fathers to all of the children. Do you know what I mean? It's not every man in these tribes that gets to mate and have children. So it's this strategic pluralism, makes women want to date upward and seek out the genetically fit, and rules and tribes prevent women from going with lesser genetic options sometimes, or mate switching or cucking or whatever. I mean, there's so much here that she's missing. She's talking about this tribal structure where women just casually sleep with everybody and the village takes care of the children. That's never been that way. This happy tribal structure was very violent. People were murdered and killed and ostracized when they were no longer of use. Children were killed when it was found that, paternity was confused. When women didn't obey rules of the tribe, they were stoned to death. And even now and today, you can go into places like in the Middle East where there's Sharia law and a woman can get stoned to death for cheating on a man. And in those cultures, it's not women having multiple husbands. So this notion that she's presenting is a very ideological one and very skewed. So she is promoting in this article this feeling, this myth of equality, which is mythological and not true. And she talks about her research in Nambia, but even when you read some of the research that comes out of this stuff from these same liberal scientists, they dime themselves out when you can read between the lines and exactly what they're saying. So she continues with, across history and cultures, men have utilized their wives' extra pair partnerships to suit their own needs. From ancient Greece to medieval Europe, infertile men enlisted lovers for their wives in order to continue their lineage. You see, this is a female-dominant fantasy. This is she's proving right now exactly how the dual mating strategy is true, because she's executing it right now by promoting this fantasy idea of the infertile weak beta male who takes care of the woman by enlisting lovers for their wives and then having children with those more genetically viable options. Isn't that kind of funny how her fantasy of what she thinks goes on in these cultures, right? And her justification for cucking is exactly describing the dual mating strategy. And yet she sits here and tries to debunk the dual mating strategy. Like, they can't see themselves in the mirror. You know what I mean? They can't see, they can't see it. They can't see themselves in the mirror. This often occurred through formalized wife lending, In almost all cases, the husband was considered a legitimate father of any children born through these liaisons, and men's interests were served by these arrangements. So she is saying her claim is that cuckoldry is serving men. And that is the myth that you're being sold. I'll get to her conclusion here. In the human realm, at least, equating cuckoldry solely with trickery and the cuckolded as weak and foolish is inaccurate. This is not to dismiss the fact that extra pair partnerships are often conducted in secret, or as they can cause, or that they can cause harm. So she gives it this caveat, okay, just to cover her butt, which is, this is not to dismiss that these could be bad, right? Rather, this variation should remind us of the dangers of claiming universalist natural tendencies for humanity, as is often the case with depictions of cuckoldry in the manosphere. We should understand not only why behaviors occur, but also how they vary. Besides proving more accurate pictures of human behavior, paying more attention to variation can serve as an antidote to the nefarious co-optation of knowledge that feeds the online underbelly of internet pseudoscience. This article is pseudoscience, right? So she's writing pseudoscience, and the Scientific America is publishing pseudoscience in this case, though it is a opinion piece. I mean, her point in that we need to be a little bit more nuanced is a point I've been making all along. But here's the thing. Just because there are exceptions to rules, there's nuances, and there's different variables and different situations, right? That doesn't negate facts. That doesn't negate what the majority of things happen the majority of times, right? That doesn't negate what we are observing about human nature. You don't get to negate factual observations and data because you're able to find little exceptions to rules. Often those little exceptions here and there are only exceptions due to different variables. And they may not even really be exceptions. They're just being presented as such or believed as such with certain people with different biases. So, what is the conclusion here? The conclusion here is that this is why I got out of academia, really, and I just focus on trying to get results for men. You cannot trust an academic, all right, just based on their credentials alone. You cannot trust a study based on the fact that it was published. There's a study, there's an academic, there's somebody with doctor at the end of their name promoting bullshit everywhere in the world. Okay. So just having that credential alone does not lend them any credibility, and you need to stop thinking that it does. What lends them credibility is the integrity of their research, the integrity of their argument, and really the results that they're getting. So you just need to be aware, because these types of narratives are subtly placed into the culture, into social conditioning, and it's showing up on your newsfeed. It's showing up in conversations. These little mind viruses are being planted. And next thing you know, you have ideas about relationships and about men and women that are untrue, and that's going to cause you to fail. Don't forget to subscribe, share, like the video. I know they always say that at the end of YouTube, but I'm really fighting against censorship here in these platforms. So help me fight against that censorship by throwing that subscription my way. If you want help with achieving better goals in life and achieving better relationships and dating experiences in your life, don't forget you can sign up for my community for free. Link is in the description.